Welcome to The Bold Blueprint, a podcast for modern educators who dare to think differently. Here we explore the intersection of education and leadership, diving into bold strategies, innovative teaching, and the mindset shifts that drive real impact. Whether you're in the classroom, leading a team, or shaping the future of education, this is your space to learn, grow, and lead with confidence. Hello, Barbie. Hello, listeners. Hello, universe. How you doing, Barbie?
I'm doing good, thank you. How are you, Jamie? I like going to the universe just then.
The universe is a pretty exciting place to be sometimes. Sometimes it's good to think big picture and looking towards the stars. I've actually started waking up at 5 a.m. I don't know
Me
if you've
too.
heard about the 5 a.m. club. Have you heard of that?
I've been starting to wake up at 5 a.m. like a week or two ago.
Well, there's actually research and there's a book and it's called the 5 a.m. Club, and it's all about how you find more hours in your day in the morning. And so by doing so, I'm actually seeing the sunrise every morning now, which is wild, but it's actually a nice way to kind of start the morning.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And if you get into the other side of it, it's like this sun activation side of what it can do for you, just feeling sunshine on your skin. And I'm off track there anyway. Um, but today, I guess we've got Daniel who's
Yeah.
joining us.
Yeah.
And sorry, I always interrupt when I should let Daniel say hi.
Hey, Daniel, how you doing?
Good, thanks, Barbie and Jamie. I guess for me, I currently am a regional manager and a multi-site educational leader and nominated supervisor with camp. I'm really excited for this. I've been looking forward to it since we asked me to come on, which was pretty exciting.
Well, you know what I'm really excited for is another man, another guy in our sector who, sometimes I personally feel like a drop in the ocean. And I'm not saying that that all the beautiful female people in our sector, but to see another guy in the ring with us is awesome. And I know you've got such impact around the work that you do. So we're really excited to be diving in today with you, getting to understand about, advocating for inclusive practice that goes really beyond what tokenism might be, and having an understanding about, support and, even your own image of yourself being in this space, and how even maybe the children or families might even put, you in a box around, just because you're a guy doesn't mean that you're the person who plays sport or not. But, I think there's so much to unpack today, Daniel, but we're so thrilled to have you on. So thanks for making time.
No, thank you very much. We're looking really
And
excited.
I know from my chats with Daniel too, especially years ago, like I think before even 2 kids, and I've got 2 kids now. Always when I've spoken I've spoken with Daniel, he's always had such an inclusive lens, I found, in his language and how he talks about whether it's the children or staff he's worked with. So that's why I thought of inviting him onto this podcast. And you can probably see in the background, I know Jamie picked it up when he came on before we started recording, he's in a service right now, relatable on the ground. And we thought a few people out there could also definitely listen and benefit and relate along the way.
So, Daniel, I mean, I'm interested, and I'd love to hear a bit about your professional experience, and then, what got you into this space, into this sector? Like, of course, you're working for camp at the moment, which is an outside school hour space. In my role, we work more in the long day care space, and of course, Barbie's got a weave of experience in all. But tell us your journey.
So for me, I actually walked into OSH after leaving the meat industry. I was a butcher, qualified retail butcher and in wholesales, and that's an industry alone. And I was starting to study to go towards being a secondary teacher. And I went back to the OSH I went to as a kid. It's just some casual pickup work. I've learned a lot from that space and things I could do better. And then I went into a couple of other providers and I fell in love with it. I honestly, the level of connection, the sense of belonging, the respect in between educators and management at the time was just phenomenal. Like, I originally was wanting to be a high school teacher, and then I was like, nope, this is my space. I worked with so many kids with neurodiversities, and just simple things like playing a board game with them, or talking to them while they're playing soccer, or going on a walk, or doing a sensory exploration or something, or even just listening to their parents. I felt like that's where I belonged, and that's where I could make the biggest impact. I'm a person that's driven by purpose. From a very young age, it's always been about making an impact, leaving a legacy, and growing. So, yeah. And it's been
That's
about,
interesting. I was actually having a. Oh, sorry.
sorry, yeah, it's been about, I've been in the industry for 5 years now. So I started as a casual educator, then I became an RP, then I went to permanent, then I became an 2IC, NSEL, educational leader. I will abbreviate a lot too, so I apologize. And nominated supervisor, and then a centre director. And then, I've moved into the regional management portfolio.
And how long have you been in a regional management portfolio for?
Coming up to 3 years. So November the 11th will be my third year.
Wow, that's such a fast trajectory into a multi-site manager space within 5 years. I think. What's been your biggest learning thus far?
I think for me, it's around operations. So operational management and building a culture within a team. I've always tried to leave whatever space I'm in better than when I started. And that's from team culture, consistency of educators, our practices, continuous improvement focus, critical reflection. I'm really big on those pieces, and inclusion for me is my happy space. And when I first started in this portfolio, my goal was to get the whole region inclusion ready, and I did a lot of work with KU, and that's how we got there. And I did a lot of PD and lots of conversations with Barbie. The amount of times I would call Barbie and be like, hey, I've got this going on. What do you think I should do? Who should I speak to? Where should I go? And I dove a lot into the laws and the regs, and understanding the quality standards and what we needed to get to that next level. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think what it showed too, just because it was almost like just because it was a hurdle, it wasn't like, all right, we give up now. Daniel was like, nope, we'll find a way. Hence why I thought of him for this type of topic around, I guess, I feel like when we start a podcast, we don't have our final podcast topic, but I know we're starting with the theme of inclusion when we start, but definitely one of the first ones that come to mind on all this. And
Well,
I'd love to.
the one thing that really drives me, as you just spoke, Daniel, and it's interesting because this morning I had a conversation with somebody else in our organization, and this idea of purpose and shared purpose and creating goals and really thinking about what does it mean for our own personal purpose and what wakes us up in the morning to jump out of bed and do the work that we do, because our sector is complex and we're working with diverse people of different age groups. And if you're in the outside of school hours care services, there's also the teaching community and the principals that we work in as well, and then the overall organizational structure. And I'm really curious, like when you started thinking about this idea of purpose around inclusion, how did you start? Like where did you kind of begin that journey, and how did you start thinking about bringing the different services on that trajectory together as a whole?
So for me, I started with going into every service and seeing how they're interacting, and then asking the educators, what do they understand of inclusion? What was their terminology in their mindset or their belief system around it? And then we started having team meetings, and I would break it down on how we would look at it. Then I started to connect with KU, and we have our internal processes as well that we have to follow with camp. But I just called people and said, hey, look, I want to do inclusion sip party where all my team come together and we break down inclusion and we start building out strategic inclusion plans. And I was speaking to schools as well, understanding their strategies. So I have a heavy involvement in my school portfolio. And so the teachers would tell me, we're doing this, or we look at it this way, adopting the behavior management strategies, whatever was in the school, to try and align our practices and families. So having individualized care plans for children that the families were involved in, that really set us up for success. And then we're looking at linking it to theorists and things like that. Like, it was a whole united team. It was about building the culture that no matter the child, we're going to support them in whatever way it is. I have kids that swear. That's the way they communicate sometimes when they are extremely overwhelmed, and that's okay because that's a behavior communication style. And you can either be, that's not okay, we're not going to tolerate that, or you can go, okay, I can understand you're frustrated. Do you want to go kick a football, or do you want to go have a drink of water? Have you eaten today? It's about that thought-provoking stages. So that's how we kind of moved to that culture.
I even like how you said, so I don't know if you even noticed it. You said the inclusion sip, you called it a party?
Yeah.
So the amount of directors and even upper management I see and hear of like, oh, they talk about I have to work on the SIP, but you spoke about it in the opposite of like, oh, and we had an inclusion SIP party. So, which I think more people should be, because we
It sounds
should
like
be
a celebration, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's why I
Yeah.
wrote. So I love the language here, because it sounds like you see it not as a burden, but as a thing people should want to be a part of. And even just that tone and language, I think, for other leaders that might be listening, because it can be daunting working on it, but changing just how we speak about it. I know we're mindful of that with kids, but even with adults, would be like, could also change their mindset on working on the SIP, and how they go about it. Sorry, I don't know if you noticed you even said that, Daniel, but
Well,
I
it was
definitely
something I was
picked it
taught
up.
by my manager, actually, is the wording is the biggest way that you can bring your culture. Because I wanted a united team. We have regular catch-ups each fortnight with my team. They'll call me. If I say I'm having a bad day, one of them will flick me a message about something they've done with one of the kids. The other day I received a text. One of our children had 3 good days for them. They did everything that they needed to do. They were feeling really good, and they wanted to send me a message. So the service leader had texted me and told me what was going on, and that they had achieved it. And I said, let them know that Mr. Daniel's so proud of them, and I'll make sure that I play a game of soccer or a board game with them when I come in next. And it's like that, for me, identifies that my team are an inclusive, proactive, and engaged with the child-led focus, which is something that I've always wanted to build out. And the language in them as well, similar to where you identified with myself, I catch them doing it all the time. And it's, for me, as a leader, because I don't always like to use the manager tag. A manager provides your task, a leader supports you along your way. As a leader, I'm like, that's my team, and I say it all the time. I'm so proud of them and where we've come along. But yeah.
That's fascinating to me because, I think it's so wonderful to hear your journey, right? It's interesting you were a butcher and then you've come into this space. What a skill set. I'm just imagining in my mind as you're, getting all the steaks ready and everything. But what a contrast to what you do. But like, to bring it back to what you're talking about, I like, in my mind, for someone to be able to call you for help, and I guess you've just said that you've done that with Barbie as well. It's you've got to really have a lot of psychological safety. I know for teams that I've led over time, it's all well and good to say to people like, I'm always available, I'm here, and then all of a sudden behind the scenes, you look underneath and it's chaos. And sometimes we can sometimes try and avoid problems, but there is, I believe, humans have got 2 real strong emotions, which is around ego and pride. And there's such strong emotions that it can overtake the mental capacity of being able to think through the problems and not have to show people weakness. That can be really tough, especially when we're dealing with some complex problems. And it sounds to me like you've really fostered this idea within teams that you're managing, and even yourself, around psychological safety.
Yeah.
It is such a bit of a buzzword in this day and age, but it's so true. What are your thoughts around this idea of psychological safety? How did you build that in your team?
So for me, it's extremely important because in OSH or in ELS, like in ECEC, we are the teacher, we are the parent, fill-in parent, we're the counsellor. We do so much for a child and other educators when we're supporting each other that there needs to be
Mm.
time to debrief. There needs to be time to stop and take a break. I always encourage my team to take leave. I'm like, how about you take a week off? I can see that things are getting a bit much at the moment. You need a break. Or I haven't seen an annual leave request come through in 6 months. What's going on? And then I'll speak to them about using our employee assistance program. Call me if you need anything. And my team, they do. I'm available from 6:30 to 6:30. If I'm needed for anything, I'm always there. And I'm in the service. So if they're saying, Daniel, I'm having trouble with such and such today, I'm like, okay, I'll pop out and let's spend some time today or tomorrow and we can work through it and let's see what some areas we can improve. And it's really important because burnout is our biggest problem in this sector at times, is that we all are here because we care and we love and we want to do things, but then we burn ourselves out trying to do it all. So I encourage my teams always call me or take some time off, have a rest, make sure you've planned a holiday because we all need to have a break. Work isn't the end and end all. And, you know, with the most recent changes to our Fair Work and stuff like that, you've got the rights to disconnect. And I remind my teams of that as well. Like there is a period of time that you don't need to be contacted unless it's an emergency. I'll let you know. Or same goes for me, preferably from 5 o'clock to 6:30, unless it's an emergency. That's my time to start to focus on my personal life. And they understand that
So
as
you're
well.
saying 5 p.m. 30
Yeah.
a.m., right? Not 5:30 p.m. to 6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not available for 30 minutes.
No, I do it
A
till
long
for
person.
12 hours. I like to have that little bit of a break. And sometimes I'll say to my
Yeah.
teams, hey guys, unless I message you this morning, assume I'm having like 20 minutes to myself for the morning. And then once I start reaching out, then we're all good to go.
Yeah.
What about, I know we're talking about psychological safety and we always internally think of it, the external, others we work with, but what about, I'm going to flip the lens on yourself because I've known you for a long time now,
Yeah.
and I guess I would say I don't want to be tokenistic in calling you the inclusive one, but you've always had such a passion on that area. How do you find, like, do you find any cost of always being the inclusive one in a team? How have you handled it? Because I've been this person myself, so I'm just curious.
At times, you get to challenge people's perspectives, and sometimes it can frustrate you. I know for myself, at times, I'm like, oh my God, can someone just please listen to me for 10 seconds? But I take it as an opportunity to educate and improve every time. And when it comes to my own psychological safety and stuff, I'm a gardener. So, and being Indigenous as well, I like being out in nature, and I will take that time aside and I'll go, all right, I'm having half
What
an
do you,
hour just
what do you garden?
yeah, I garden.
What do you, what do you,
Fruit
but
trees,
what kind of gardening?
all types. So veggie gardening, your florals. I have 5 rose bushes, which I'm
Wow.
absolutely obsessed with. And then I've got fruit trees, and
Yeah.
I have a couple of chickens.
What kind of fruit trees do you have?
Fruit trees, I've got 2 apples, so a gala and a leprechauna, which is like a miniature Granny Smith, and not Granny Smith. Yeah, no, it is Granny Smith apples. Yeah, the green ones. Yeah, and then a peach tree, banana, lime, lemon. I think that's everything for those ones. Yeah, and then
Yeah, beautiful. So what you're saying is really about finding that space within yourself to kind of disconnect,
yeah,
because this idea of the right to disconnect, in my opinion, from a Fair Work, I mean, we can all turn our phones off. We don't have to respond and not be punitive against that, but also how you make conscious decisions out of the workplace to kind of reset yourself, because what we do is highly emotional. I mean, even it doesn't matter about the role type. You could be, starting out 5 years ago. I'm sure there would have been highly emotional things that have occurred in that period of time compared to
Yeah.
now. Um, I think that's pretty important. How you be able to look after yourself and give those personal boundaries. That's
Yeah.
important.
Mm.
I
And I've
think,
noticed that, like, even that gardening is sorry, it's a different pace, like, to probably what your work is. Like, I know when I
yeah,
was listening to you talk, I'm like, "Oh, that sounds lovely." Like it would help you with those resetting moments.
yeah, it really does. And something that was actually kind of reset my mind. I was listening to the Play podcast that you guys did, and it reminded me as well, in work, I can just, again, go and play with the kids and just relax. And it's something that I've been doing more and more often. When you move up in leadership, you have more complex matters going on, and there's some times that you just need to relax. And there was a day I had one of those days, and I went, that's it. I'm going to play footy with the boys for an hour. And then I went in and did craft with the rest of the kids for the rest of the afternoon. And that was just my afternoon. And the team were like, oh, we don't get to see you really just relax sometimes. And I was like, yeah, well, this is me taking that relax step.
That is so bloody cool, Daniel. I mean, I have had a very similar conversation with some of our operation managers, and we use a communication tool called Slack. I think that you might use Teams potentially.
Yep.
Same idea. And there are some services out there that don't have the benefit of having a Daniel or operation managers. There are lots of sole operators out across the country. It's about 70% of the sector, actually. Um, and it is about how you find tools and tips for yourself. And we do go through life, and I think in modern day, now there's so many notifications. We're always available. There's so many emails. I bloody hate emails. They just come through thick and fast. And I think sometimes we forget about the importance of what a day is, and this idea that we have all entered the sector to make a difference to children's families and each other lives, that everything else sometimes takes precedent. And I remember a couple of years ago, I actually did this activity with a bunch of center managers, and what I asked them to do, and they had to come onto a huddle. I gave them a 4 week turnaround time, and they had to do a presentation, which put them on the spot because they didn't want to do it, but they did a really good job. And they had to come back and have the idea about how leadership was shown out of the office.
Mm-hmm.
And what came through from that presentation was some of them decided to get back into the classroom for periods of time. Some of them did activities and then put themselves on the program to do the art activity, in your words, or go outside and do some outdoor experiences. And what they ended up finding was the teams felt a bit more confident around what they were planning around things, because they got to see the shadowing of their leader modeling what great looks like. And the center manager eventually felt a bit more energized because they got away. Because I don't think anyone really comes into this space wanting to be office workers. And I believe if you want to come into a leadership role and you want to be off the floor, you're not the right person for our sector, in my opinion. You should really be thinking about pockets of time where the office is important because there's things that need to happen. But just spending all the time and living in the clouds isn't really about the interests of safety of children and the well-being of staff, and how we can really spend quality time out and about and model these behaviors. And actually, it was so exciting when people got through their nervous energy. I ended up getting like the CEO and other people watch those presentations, and I put a bit of pressure on that. But it was really fascinating to see, because I think sometimes we forget about the importance of that purpose that you spoke about, and the reasoning and the why about why we do. Because if you ask people, what's your why and why in this space, I'm sure as heck most people are not going to say, because I need to respond to emails. I'm
Yeah.
sure. I'm sure. And if we think about this idea of inclusion and psychological safety, bringing it back to the topic that we're covering, it is about sometimes being conscious with our time. We only have a certain amount of time in our day to be able to get the biggest impact. And I sometimes see spaces and centers across the nation, and I'm like, my gosh, you've got the same amount of time as these other centers. How are you doing this? And it is sometimes about how we can be more mindful about how we show up for our day, and also be able to switch off and reset our energy.
Yeah, no, definitely. I totally agree with that. Um, it reminds me of, we have a child at one of my schools where they were new, they had a lot going on with their background, and I had set up all their plans, met with the families, etc. Then on their first day, I had said to them before they came in, I have 1 hour allocated for me and you just to hang out, and we can do whatever you want just so that you feel comfortable when you start. And to this day, the child will come in every afternoon and check if I'm in for the day, just so that we can hang out and we can play. We played Hungry Hungry Hippos, which is really, look, I'm a bit competitive, but I was pretty
The
even.
best game ever.
Yeah. And so it's bringing the kids in. Like when I look at this space and how we operate, I was even talking to my manager the other day about it. He was saying, like, where do you want to go in your career? What are you doing? And I was like, I never want to go into a role where I'm just stuck behind a computer. I need to be in the field. I need to be in contact with people, seeing the progression of the services, the children, and making sure that I'm always within operations, because I have seen leaders before, they move up in the chains and they forget the minute pressures in operations. You're working with little humans, you're working with their families, and you're going to have your good days. You're going to have your challenging days where you can create all these policies, processes, you can follow regulations, quote this, quote that, but there's going to be times that you're going to be tested, and the teams need to be they need to know this is actually practical in our practice, rather than, saying that we're going to hold everyone's hands for the whole hour and walk around and do this and do that, when reflectively that's not a practice that's going to work. And yeah, there's so many aspects around inclusion, cultural inclusion. When I first started in the sector, I remember being Indigenous, there wasn't a lot. Every service I'd interact with had very minute understandings or no understandings at all. And it would be like, you're Indigenous, so you can just do it. And it's something that I've built in with my team, that, yes, I identify as Indigenous, but it doesn't also fall on me just to do all the teachings. You guys need to come along and in the journey. And some services have taken it in strides and run miles ahead of others, but others are in different stages of their learning, and I'm coaching them on it. And to the point now where I walk into some services and every week there is activities that are from an Indigenous perspective, but it's not saying, screaming, look at me, we're doing an Indigenous thing. It's just authentically part of the program. And the children, there's one service they have revised their acknowledgement to country, I think 6 times in this term, but it's because the kids keep wanting to make amendments and building it out further and adding in there something they've learned at school or they've learned in OSH, or on the weekend they were doing something, and it's so authentically embedded. Like, that's where I look at inclusion, and it's not a box that you're trying to tick. You're not getting your funding just because you want the funding. You're doing it so that every child that steps in your space has adequate, functional and inclusive sense of belonging. My business has 5 core values that we live by, which is courage, belonging, joy, respect, and gratitude. And I try to make sure that within my team that's being emphasized every day. If it's not a thank you, it's, being courageous because they took on a new task for the day, or they created a sense of belonging because the kids made them artworks. I say, every time a child makes you an artwork, stick it up in the office, frame it somewhere, because that's them connecting with you and creating that sense of belonging because they've taken their time to create something for you. I remember when I was a coordinator, the amount of things I would come home with and have stacked up of artworks. My family would come over and go, why do you have all these artworks? I'm like, because all the kids made them for me and I can't fit them all in my office, so I'm just going to rotate them each few weeks. But yeah, I could go on for hours around all of it.
I was about to say, I have a whole heap of dot points I was typing as you're talking, because sometimes I know with people they don't know where to start, but you've given some really, it sounds like easy when you say it, but for people that are on the other side, it's not always the same thing. Even just that child you're onboarding knew they had behavior plans, and just spending that 1 hour with them on their first day, that's free besides the hour, but that's free, nothing extra needed other than time. And I wrote in my notes, it sounds simple to implement, but sometimes the simplest thing isn't always the first thing that comes to mind when we're in a service and not sure what to do. I love that, because I think it just shows also that child. I was that child. Usually it comes from places where they're just always used to being a disappointment. Like, oh, okay, you already know ahead of time. This is with my child lens on what they're going to think of me. I'm already going to be in trouble, blah, blah, blah. So you, as a child, you even go in with that lens to, I can just imagine if I went somewhere new, because I change schools all the time, if I had someone actually be like, okay, I've got an hour to spend with you, I think I would be in shock. I'd be like, what? But that value of self that would help instill on, it all depends on their background, but I know if it was me at that time, that I would have definitely needed at that time, can play a huge difference, that there's an adult that doesn't even know me willing to give me an hour, and it's my choice, and I'm safe environment. Like, there's just so many knock-ons from that 1 hour. um so I'll keep rambling on about that, but that's just, yeah, huge. Again, you might not even notice the big scheme of things, but I can see just straight away how much of an impact that can make on a child starting the service.
I 100% agree. And I think what you've done is that you've really thought through, like, that still gives people who likes to be really time planned, like, of course, children, and, we've got to think about the rights of the children, and going through this idea of not being a structure, but also in our space, sometimes there are priorities that we need to work through as well. So that allowed that child. So I'm wondering if they're, like, for our listeners out there, even if you are in a classroom setting in a long daycare space, or in the before and after school care space, or if you're in a leadership role, what does Monday to Friday look like? What does your rostered or your time shifts look like? And how can you realistically break down this idea around this idea of inclusion, inclusivity, psychological safety for yourself, around how can we make sure that we're being present, and how are we making sure that what I've personally done, Daniel, is recently, I do in the morning, I've got in my calendar, because I live my life by my calendar. So that blocking is, I lean into that. But I've got it in my calendar at 7:30 every morning to send me a 10-minute reminder to go, what's your top 3 things that you want to achieve today? And in that just prompts a thought. I don't have to do too much, but it puts that into my mindset to go, brand new day. How was yesterday? What could I do differently today? And what are the things that I want to be able to focus on? And what I've learned over the years, if you think about just the top 3 things maximum, then your day might turn into not what you anticipated it to be, but you can always go back to simplifying, because our days are so hectic and busy. And, sometimes are with children. And to your point, you might have a child who's got some behavioral concerns, and then all of a sudden your day goes in that direction because, that's where our path is taking us. But how do we come back to what does success look like, and how can we make sure that we're feeling on top of this idea of inclusion? And I sometimes think inclusion, we think about this idea of children being included and others being included, but we've also got to sometimes think about how we self-managing our own inclusion in that program.
Yeah, so for me, something that I did to ensure that I was a part of the service, being in a multi-site operation level and being an educational leader, when I first took it on, I was just trying to find basic ways to belong to it all. And my region originally was very spread out across Sydney. And the first thing I did was I created my own staff poster where it said, I'm Daniel, I'm the educational leader and the nominated supervisor, and had it in the service alongside my service leader, my educators. And that gave me that first sense of belonging and inclusion to my portfolio. And then so the kids knew what my role was, because when I first rock up, they'd be like, and who are you? What's your job? And what do you do? And I'd be like, oh, I'm here to support the team. And they're like, well, what does that mean? And I was like, Well, kind of think of it like a principal, because I was trying to relate to them so they could understand the, I guess, role, without having to give them all the terminology and the jargon. I was like, you know how your principal helps your teachers when they're with you? That's what I do. That's basically me. But I get to visit a lot of schools. Um, and one other thing we built into eventually, so a part of all of our service philosophies, um, we start off with acknowledging what land we are on the Indigenous community lands, and then I will then have a part which recognises Indigenous and First Nation people as the first documented educators in Australia. And for me, that was my cultural inclusion into all my service philosophies. Um, and yeah, little things like that. Or we have every term I do a recap newsletter for each service. The service will do their part, and then I'll do my educational leader bit, and that makes me still feel connected. Or when my kids from different services will say, "Can Mr. Daniel come out today?" or "Can you get him to do this in this week?" and being, I guess, asked to be there as such makes me feel a sense of belonging, because I do manage 15 services ranging from 10 kids to 270. So they're all various, and that's how I made that sense of belonging for myself and inclusion. And yeah, making sure that, and my team, I like to catch up with them regularly so that they know that I'm here, and it also brings me to that connection. When we have like assessment and ratings or coming up, I get my teams pumped. I'm like, we're going, we've got this ready to go. I know that I believe in you. We've got this, and this. We've done this. We're going to be able to show this point and do this thing, and it's changed also that culture around with authorized officers as well. My teams know that I will call an authorized officer and I'm like, hey, I've got this query. Can you help me solve it? Or what things do I need to implement here? Or changing those things. And it's like inclusion, when we look at the word versus what we actually do with it, there's how do you bring in external stakeholders to be a part of your services and engage with them. And you're going to have children which need inclusion practices that support them. Like, do you set up a music area for a child that has troubles with transitioning? So you have a piano going with some headphones and stuff for them while they settle into the space, so then they can start with the other activities. Or having an authorized officer pop out for a visit because you want them to see the service and understand getting those tips and tricks. Or saying to the educators, guys, I don't want to see a program where it's just you're telling me it's all child led. Where's the things from you guys? Like, what have you put in this week that you were excited to share with the children? And building a network. The biggest thing I learned from Barbie was build your network around you. And that's what I did with my team. I was like, guys, we're 15. Where there's 15 of us, there's this many educators, there's this many service leaders. You guys should know each other more than you know me, to be honest, because you guys have that network and where you can support, and we've built that, I guess, culture. And where my teams will say to me, we had a good reflection the other week. They're like, when we first started together, I didn't really know anyone, but now I'm checking when people about their kids, what did they do on the weekend, all these little things, which creates that strengthening for me in quality area 4 around your staffing arrangements. And it can lead into quality 7s and 6. And it's about that collaborative. I said, like, collaborative partnerships can also be other services. You don't just have to be with parents in the school community of that service. There's so much you can expand from it. I'll keep rambling, but yeah, inclusion you can really unpack in that aspects.
No,
But
I really what I'm getting from this conversation, Marby, I don't know if you agree with me, but inclusion isn't a vibe. It really feels like inclusion is a responsibility.
yeah, I 100% agree with that. It's a responsibility. Look, we're in a care environment, and it's something that I've learned that you need to take that lens of being caring. A simple way. Just take 5 minutes to care and listen, and you can do so much with that information. Even to the point where I'm starting
Yeah.
to support my teams around inclusion around social dynamics and economics and environmental impacts with children outside of OSH. We're going to have children which come from domestic violence backgrounds, children that have additional needs. You're going to have children which English is a second language. How do we then bring in community groups or reach out to people to support us in these areas, and understanding that your tone, the simple thing, can trigger a child without you realizing, or a phrase that you might use that they don't feel comfortable with, or little things like that. And yeah, I could go on for hours, but yeah, there's little things that we try.
I find yeah, even assumptions. A lot of educators make assumptions that everything's good in everyone's world, mum, dad, blah 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 blah. Whereas those assumptions, I found, this is just my personal reflection, not always making that assumption, because I most of the time never lived with mum or dad. And I used to hate when it came to, I'm not against doing things like Mother's Day and all that. I actually loved doing them when I had a supportive educator around that's used language of not, because I've had teachers tell me back when I was at school, all right, you're going to make something for Mother's Day. And I'm like, well, I don't have one around. That's okay. You still make one for your mum. It's like, I love then seeing the language of, I still liked making one, but I love them then thinking of someone else safe in their world and not making it a person, because not all kids have a safe, caring adult. I know every child needs one. Rita Pearson, I think, I'm not even quoting, but misphrasing, said that, but they don't always have that. But then even to that child, not assuming they have that, and it could be even just using the language of like whether they make it for someone else or something like an object, because they don't always, it could be a toy they've always had or something that's more relatable, so they still feel included in that activity. Because me personally, I still always wanted to do it. I didn't want to be excluded or made to feel I had to conform, if that makes any sense. It's like I wanted to be included but not do it 100% the same as everyone else.
Yeah, I have
So
that
Daniel,
I have with simple things like that. We've got so Mother's Day and Father's Day. Also, when you've got children which have queer parents, certain days are different to them. So it's how you include in that aspect. And some children, their parents are no longer with them, and then how do you, like you say, your grandparents, a teacher, maybe it's an educator, or like you start giving them those suggestions has made a major difference. And I'm always mindful, even the simple thing like when I will try and get the boys and girls' attention, and I'll always say, hey, boys, girls, and everyone in between, because you never know, you may have a child that identifies not with that specific gender base. So, and I've had kids ask me, and I say, well, sometimes people have preferences, and this is where they sit, and then they'll go, oh, okay, and then that's it. Children, I love when it comes to inclusion because it's so simple. They will ask a question, and once you give them their answer, they're satisfied. And if they're not, they'll ask some more, but eventually they'll get there. With adults, that's like we forget. It's just quite simple, is inclusion realistically.
That's where we've got to do this on a whole nother topic, and there'll be in the future items, but about implicit biases and where biases are formed, and how over people getting older, this idea of developing biases and the environmental impacts that have on that, and the impacts that we come into our workspace with our own biases, and how we need to understand that everyone's got a bias, and bias and inclusion actually are the yin and yang, but they're actually within each other. But just looking at the time, Daniel, I mean, we've got probably 2 more questions to ask you. This has been such a great conversation. Yeah. But if you were to advise our listeners out there with this idea of inclusion, and thinking about where could someone be inspired to start with, what's the one takeaway that you'd like everyone to take from this discussion?
I would say the first thing to do is take a step back from your service in a space, allocate half an hour to look at your environment and think, do we have sensory resources available for children? And then once you've made all those quick assessments, have a chat to KU, Inclusion for New South Wales in particular, and ACT, but you've got Gowrie and a couple of other organisations across the country. So depending where you're listening from, but reach out to your inclusion agency, because they'll be your next step to build that out for you, and they'll challenge your perspective. So you've got to take a reflective component to it.
Yeah, right. Wow. And I guess, I mean, today we've covered so much. I mean, Daniel, we would love to invite you back at another date, because, like, we didn't even get into the whole perspective of being a
Yeah.
man in the sector. And I'm sure we could unpack so much more. So we would love to invite you back. But, Barbie, we definitely want to, we want to absolutely ask our final question, if possible.
Yes, okay. And in the theme of inclusion too. So it is, what was your first live, it could be a live performance, musical, or it could be theatre or anything of the sorts, even a movie theatre, because everyone even has all different experiences. But what was your first live performance? So I know for Jamie and I, we both did a band. We've had someone do a movie. I can't remember what something else has been, but there's all
play?
random things out there. A play, and it's got nothing to do with what we chat about. So it's a nice tone to end the conversation with.
Do you mean being like a part of or watching? Sorry, just for clarification for myself.
However,
Ah,
we haven't had that question. So however you determine that.
My first concert I went to, and I worked my butt off to save for it at Macca's on my lovely $7 an hour, was Pink, True Love concert. And it was such a great time for me because I just confirmed who I was in my sexuality. And I went down to Sydney and we stayed on Oxford Street, and I went to watch Pink, and then I went and explored Oxford Street the next day with my mum, and I was wearing a onesie, and I was originally from the bush out in the Central West, so it was nothing like the culture I was used to. And ever since then, every time Pink comes, I book a concert ticket just to see her in one space or another. It's something that's always been left with me.
What a memory. And I saw Pink in her last concert that she came to, because I had never gone to see her. And I was so impressed with how she literally flew through the stadium. And I was like, this is like, she went to like people on the right at the last row in the nosebleeds. And she was so close, waving to everyone as the concert had finished. And I was, it's pretty special what she does.
She does that every concert, which has always been amazed me. I remember when I'd seen her at True Love, I was so jealous because the opposite side of the stadium, she was actually in the stadium seats sitting next to someone, and it was directly on the opposite side of me. And I was like, oh, Mum, I wish we sat over there. But yeah.
We usually only ask that one question, but because Daniel had a different thing there, what about the first, because you used to perform, what was the first? Yeah, am I right in thinking that way?
Yeah, I did throughout primary school, just because of my teacher. She would make sure we had to do everything. The first thing I did was choir. Ironically, I'm not really a good singer, but we all did it, and we performed at the Joan Sutherland Centre in Penrith. And I remember being so nervous, and I had to have like a black shirt and these strict black pants with black socks and black shoes. And I remember going to my mum, I was like, I can't sing. What am I going to do? And she's like, just lip sync if you have to. Do whatever you can. And just have fun. And yeah, I remember that.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Daniel, for being with us today. What a great conversation that we've had. And Barbie, what a treat. What a journey that we're on. These last quite a few episodes, we've really unpacked a lot of different aspects, and there's definitely some core themes that are coming through, but I can't wait till next week.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for joining us, Daniel.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate it, guys. It was really good. And yeah, definitely just reach out and we can catch up again for sure.
Thanks for listening to The Bold Blueprint.
If you'd like to get in touch, you can reach out to us on
elm.net.au or
fireflyhr.com.au.
Bye.